Hi. Good, hi. Hey, so first, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, where are you? Just a couple hands. Okay, so it's actually not about what the chairman said. I grew up in Baltimore, and I just want to say thank you, because my dad, who's 75 now, when he was 50, had a health crisis, and he fell in love with you and music at that point in his life. So thank you, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. And he's thrilled that I'm here and get to listen to the Cleveland Orchestra tonight. Although he wishes I was in Baltimore listening to you, probably. Hey, so the Center for Performance and Civic Practice is an entity that myself and a couple collaborators founded a few years ago, and we work basically on bringing artists and communities together and working with artists and communities that work together to build healthy communities. And what I was invited to do today was kind of help host this panel with some amazing folks who are going to join us in a conversation. But I was also invited to take a few minutes and kind of frame the conversation. So when I was asked to be with you, the title, Getting Real About Relevance, Our Value Through the Eyes of Others, existed. And here's sort of what was defined as the premise. How our orchestras can matter more in today's world, how orchestras can employ the music we make to address community needs, how orchestras can help provide what the public values, and how we can develop relationships with the community that enable us to be involved in meaningful ways. It's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. I tried to break it down a little bit and started with relevance. What does it mean? And what we focus on at the center is the following idea, that relevance is relationship and relationship is listening. So what I kind of want to talk about for a moment is the act of listening in regard to what does it take to know the needs of others and how do we learn what the public values. And then we wanted to ask this question. In what ways do we, orchestras, listen to the public with the same quality and behaviors of attention we ask them to give us when they are in our spaces listening to our music? I don't have an answer to that question, but that question is sort of the question of these next minutes that we have together. We have a hard stop at 3 because we have people who have to be at other things. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through this part. But the first thing I need to ask you is, how many folks in the room from the eastern part of the US? Hands up. That's a lot. Let's say the Midwest. How many from the Midwest? That's a lot. The South. Some, fewer, okay. The West, and look around, the West Coast. The Plains, whatever that means to you. Yes? All right, somewhere off the mainland. Let's say off the mainland, off the continental US. How about international? How many are here international? There's some hands more in the back, which is interesting. Okay, great. All right, different question. Scale of organization. How many folks here would describe the institutions that you are here as a part of as large scale? Whatever that means to you, whether that's budget or sort of number of employees. Okay, how about medium scale? Small scale. The most hands went up for small scale. That's interesting and surprising to me. That's really great. Okay, here's the last one, job, role in the work. Hands up if you make the art, whatever that means to you. If you self-define as, yes, I'm involved in making the art. And look around, okay? Hands up if you develop strategies, write text, or create images used to persuade, invite people to attend things. Yeah, great. It's a lot, all right? Hands up if you initiate partnerships in the community. Okay? Hands up if you maintain partnerships in the community. This may not be the same hands. Hands up if you set ticket prices, whatever that means to you process-wise. Hands up if you lead work in community settings. Hands up if you raise money. That's the most hands so far. Hands up if you design education programs. Hands up if you manage people. Conductors, where are you? Conductors. I am so in awe of conductors. Hands up if you were a volunteer at an orchestra. Hands up if you serve on a board. All right? More volunteers than board members in this moment, but some people may identify as part of both groups, certainly. Actually, I want to ask you one other thing. Hands up if you are a business partner of the League and were not otherwise represented up there. A couple hands in the back. Shy hands for that one. Okay. I want to also kind of premise us by asking this. I'd like to ask if we can agree to a few things before we start this conversation up here. Some things that we probably don't need to spend a lot of time persuading each other of. Some things that probably, maybe, are shared values in this room. 1, music is awesome. 2, orchestras are awesome. 3, and this one's important, Cleveland Orchestra is awesome. Yeah? We don't have to spend time on that now because we know that. And we believe that, and just so we're clear on that, really awesome, yeah? Okay, so, yes. So, just so we don't have to talk about or prove just a few other things very quickly, orchestras can be transformative and life-affirming, yeah? It's just sort of, we will say that here before we have a conversation about relevance. This we believe, this we know. Virtuosic orchestral accomplishment is meaningful. Young people are better off with arts education and exposure to great art. Yes, we'll agree? Yes. We will agree so much that we will applaud that. Yes. A successful visible orchestra makes a place more attractive to companies seeking to attract employees and aids communities seeking tourist dollars as part of a comprehensive economic vision. Yes? Done. Said that. Great. Communities benefit from successful arts organizations in lots of ways. In economic ways, in social binding ways, in intrinsic values ways. Great art makes places more livable and more great. Yes? Yes, we agree with that. We don't have to reiterate it. So we don't need to spend a lot of our panel time today reiterating these things. We know these things are true. I will also suggest, because those things are also true in other arts-based not-for-profit sectors, museums, theaters, dance companies, all the things I just said, all the things we believe are positives about art, about music, about orchestras in our communities, are often in collision with some other things we probably agree are challenges. Not everyone agrees with us. And we work on that a lot, yes? Okay, so that's a given. And then these issues. Issues of access, including but not limited to cost. Issues of culture, such as whether or not people feel included, invited into the buildings and norms of orchestra settings, yes? Yes. Issues of repertoire and familiarity and alienation and interest and exposure, yes? These are all sort of in the realm of these are real challenges. Which brings us back to what does it take to know the needs of others? How do we learn what the public values? And in what ways do we listen to the public with the same quality and behaviors of attention we ask them to give us when they are in our spaces listening to our music? So sort of coming back around to that. So to have a conversation about relevance, about community needs, about authentic relationships in the minutes that we have that extend beyond our organizations, we have 4 amazing folks here to sort of be in that conversation with us. And I want to say that these are a couple questions like what I'll ask them in a moment. How do we know when we're listening well? How do we continue to embed the great work we do, as well as develop new work and practices in true response to what we learn, not just what we assume we know? And when we work at the center, and more of our work has been theaters, museums, dance companies, art centers, presenters. We are here really as listeners in a lot of ways today to learn from you. But this is a big question, not just what we assume we know. How do we tell the story of how and why we matter, and what work do we have to do to matter more? Which is what everyone has been speaking about up here so far, in terms of the work you're already doing and the work that you want to be doing. So I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to read this to you, but first I'm going to invite our 4 folks to come up this staircase, and while you're coming up, I'll say this out loud, and then it'll time out perfectly, because you'll be here. And your names are on the chairs. Alisa, come on out. I think as she comes out, it'll help cover also, we should applaud Alisa once more for her beautiful music. It was beautiful to get to hear you. Yeah. So I think you're down there. Oh, you're right next to me. So Christopher, Beth, Armond at the end over there. So we're up here together, and we're going to actually try to make this a bit more of a dialogue than a series of monologues. They've given me permission to time them, to even interrupt them, which is very generous of these 4 folks who I'm just meeting. And I'm going to ask them a couple questions and then invite them to ask each other some questions, and we'll see where the conversation goes. And I'm going to sort of get my timer out. This is such a beautiful space. It can be slightly intimidating up here. But I'm going to put this down here, and I'm going to start and make sure that I've got the right slide. Yeah. Christopher Alvarado And I think what I'm going to do is, as we do the first question, I'll read just a really brief bio, yeah? So that way we can sort of welcome each person. Christopher Alvarado is the executive director of Slavic Village Development, the community development cooperative that serves 22,000 residents living in the neighborhoods of Broadway Slavic Village, a 5-square-mile area southeast of downtown Cleveland. First, welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much.
And Christopher, I'm going to ask you, as our first person to sort of get at this idea of relevance and listening, if you'd start us off, because you don't work in the orchestral world, as 3 of the 4 folks up here don't, although everyone here has their contact and experience with it. And I'm interested in all of us having access not just to orchestral stories, but other sectors and other experiences. So I'm wondering, you lead an organization that serves people and works with people. What does relevance and listening mean to you? 2 minutes starts now.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you all for letting me join you this fine afternoon, and especially to the Cleveland Orchestra for having their residency in our neighborhoods of Broadway Slavic Village. We do work in the community through housing development, through commercial development, and through community organizing. And for us, community organizing means bringing together neighborhoods, bringing neighbors together with one another, developing leadership in those neighbors, and getting them to organize with one another to better their blocks, to have a say in what our neighborhood looks like. We're an incredibly diverse neighborhood here in the city. We're half black, half white. We have incredible ethnic roots from Alabama to Poland. And what that means is that we've got so many different folks with so many different experiences that we're really challenged to get them to talk to one another and to build trust. It's difficult to build trust when you don't have the same experiences as your neighbors do, but
I want to highlight
once
that.
You do,
you just said it's difficult to build trust when you don't have the same experience as your neighbors.
Right.
I just want to highlight that in this conversation. Continue, please.
Real good. But once you do, when you talk about the things that folks have in common, whether it's raising kids or just living on the same block and dealing with many of the same everyday issues, such as which grocery store do you go to, that's when we begin building trust and being able to build leadership within our residents is important because that perpetuates our growth and our ability to raise our kids and develop safer, better neighborhoods.
Christopher, one sort of quick follow-up before we go on. So if you're working with so many diverse communities, diverse constituencies, I know you and I talked before, and it's really important to you to learn about the assets that communities have, as well as sort of looking for the deficits.
Very much so. So a lot of the folks that we work with typically are from underrepresented communities and folks who don't have an opportunity to take leadership, whether they're persons of color or folks who who struggle with poverty. We talk about building relationships of mutuality. The idea that every person in our neighborhood, and really anybody that we work with, has a gift to give to each other, whether it's just being able to keep an eye on the street or being able to empathize with what their other neighbors are dealing with.
So you earn trust not just by delivering a service, but by looking for ways to share power and leadership with the constituencies you're working with.
Absolutely. And when you share that power and you empower folks to make those decisions, it creates a more stable neyborhood. It creates obviously more buy-in because these are the folks who are making the decisions for their neighborhoods, and it breaks down these barriers and makes folks less isolated.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm going to come back and I'm going to come over here for a moment. Armond, is it okay if I come over here now?
It's okay.
All right. I've got Armond Budish, who is the Cuyahoga County executive and who took office as the county executive in January of 2015, so fairly recently.
Very recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much.
And I'd love to ask you, that's an elected position, yes?
It is.
So you, in terms of listening to stakeholders and constituents, you have had to promise a lot of people that you were listening and were going to continue listening as you move into public service. And so we are here in the not-for-profit sector where people have a sort of public good responsibility to community. And I wonder what that is for you in terms of listening to your stakeholders and constituents. And then I'm going to aim it a little more at the arts in a moment.
For 2 years, I was running for this office to start with, and much of that is going around and listening. You listen to people, you listen to their desires, their needs, their wants around the community. People of all different stations in life, and that's how, at least for me, I develop my platform, my plans, my vision for the county. Since I took office in January, we've continued that. One of my first activities, we announced that we were going to meet with 100 business leaders in 100 days, and Beth Mooney was one of those people who helped me with this, and we did that. In fact, we met with hundreds of business leaders in the first 100 days. And again, it was a listening tour. It was learning, how we create jobs, what's important, what's needed in our community.
I want to ask you a question because you skipped over a part that seems really interesting. You went out and listened to people while you were running for office.
That's correct.
And then you said, okay, I'm in office and I did a listening tour. How did you persuade people to vote for you, which meant that they must have believed you were listening to them? So how were you able to tell the story of, I am an institution, a person who has listened, and therefore you should put your trust in me?
I just promised dead people everything they asked for. Just joking, in case there's anybody from the media out here. It's all joking.
But are you really joking?
I am really joking.
Okay. All right.
We've had some problems in Cuyahoga County.
Oh,
I'm
gotcha.
really joking.
All right.
No, the listening is the first critical piece, because people want to know what your vision is for the community, and you're going to rise and fall on your vision. I developed my vision based on a lot of different things, based on my upbringing, my education, my family, but also listening to what's needed in the community. That's a critical piece of it. So, it's not a matter of promising people, it's a matter of expressing a vision that resonates with the community.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back, but I'm going to shift over to Beth, and I'll do my brief intro, which is Beth Mooney has been chairman and CEO of KeyCorp since May 1st, 2011. Yeah? And so we're going to welcome Beth, and I forgot to also have us welcome Armond, so we'll welcome both of them. And Beth, I was wondering, I know you and I got to talk a little bit before, as a business leader and as a community leader, you have so much experience with different constituencies and stakeholders and customers and consumers. I wonder, how do you determine or engage in the relevance conversation? What does that mean to you, and what does listening mean to you?
We did have a chance to talk about it, and I think one of the interesting themes across businesses and relevant to this group is this notion of building relationships, building relevance through listening. And as running a business, indeed, one of the things we say, banks, KeyCorp is a bank headquartered here in Cleveland, Ohio, that we are here to help our clients and our communities thrive. Kind of a basic purpose of why we get up every day. And we do that through the relationships we can build and the services we can provide, the advice we can provide, the confidence that we can give people to make decisions in their own life, kind of echoing some of what Chris talked about. And one of the interesting learnings is we sometimes think we know what people want, and therefore we listen to affirm what we already believe. And I think one of the breakthroughs all of us need to do if we're really going to seek relevance, seek significance, and as you teed up, how do we create connections to communities that are broader or different, not just in the moment when they listen to the music, is you have to have the tools to really engage with what do people really want and need, what do they really value, and how do you best reach them, both through, in our case, through our products, through our services, through the advice we give, down to the people who deal with them in those various needs. And it is really it is core. If people don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, you can't have a relationship with them. They will make other choices, they will be there in the moment, but then be gone. And I think that is critical and very interesting to the dialogue here with the League, is this notion of listening and building relationships and finding a way to turn the paradigm, not what we think people want, but how do we take what we have and deliver it in ways that are really relevant to them.
I think I really appreciate that framework and that reminder about not hearing what we want to hear. And I'm curious, when there is a lot at stake, let's say resources or organizational history or tradition, if you are engaging with different stakeholders or constituencies than you previously have, and you are hearing needs that you want to address that demand that you perhaps change or alter system or structure in some way, how do you listen for that with an openness and vulnerability while still being responsible to your organization and all the people who support what you currently do? Does that resonate at all? Yes? How does that?
I think I'm the one. Does it resonate with me? It does. And here's what I think some piece of what goes through my mind with that is, on some point, you can't be something you're not.
Yes.
You can't not be an orchestra. We can't not be a bank. So when you listen, if there's something that people desire or want that really doesn't fit your competency, your values, your abilities, you can't be those things. But within the what you are, I think there is the ability to try and say, if it's a method of delivery, if you could do this differently, and I notice you're keeping time with a device that is changing all our worlds. If this is how people want to do business with us, what do we need to do to adapt and become more relevant? So I don't think you can become something you're not, and you can't be all things to all people. So it also does force the rigor of saying, how do you prioritize what you can do, where you will be good and distinctive, and then really try and connect with what are some of the trends or desires of those constituents or audiences you're best prepared to serve. And so I think there's an art in that, not a science, although I think the world of data and technology is changing some of that, and I think that's the key that you've got to have.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and I'm going to turn to Lisa. I'm going to read your bio, which feels funny after we've gotten to hear you. And I actually have, I think I have one. Look at that one. There you are. But I also wanted to put that up because that felt more appropriate.
I know what that is.
So this says, I think that says Alisa Weilerstein, internationally renowned cellist, whom you just heard play some pretty outstanding music with the youth orchestra, which is true. Pretty beautiful. Alisa Weilerstein is an internationally renowned award-winning American cellist and a recipient of a 2011 MacArthur Fellowship. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I've been really interested to ask you this question, and we spoke about it a little bit before as well, which is your professional and creative career and life is based on coming into spaces where people come to listen to you. Mm-hmm. So where and when do you listen? And how is that a part of your practice as an artist, as a person?
Well, it's interesting you say that because when let's say someone who's coming to a concert for the first time may ask me what I do, I said, well, my main purpose is to communicate. And to communicate things which are supposedly, well, I actually strongly believe they're inexpressible in words. Thoughts, philosophies, ideas, emotions. And so one way in which I feel that I'm listening, and this could sound far out, but it's amazing how much we performers feel from the audience, even while we are playing. The kind of vibration, whether they're with us or whether they're losing attention or whether they're believing what they're hearing or falling asleep. I mean, we feel all that. So that's, so I mean, it's sort of a very intensely vibrational type of thing, no pun intended. But in other ways, I think, a challenge for us and also for orchestras. I mean, I don't work in an institution, so I don't deal with the numbers. I know what I feel on stage and what I can see in the audience. But we have the problem of appealing to long-time subscribers who expect certain things, and also with the problem of trying to draw young people in. So you're dealing with potentially very, very diverging constituencies. And so, a young person, and this is what I hear constantly from people of my generation who are very interested in the arts, but they're afraid to come into a classical music hall to sit still, to sit in a row of people, you know, afraid to crunch anything with their hands, a candy wrapper, or, you know, because of course we can hear that, afraid to cough, not knowing when to clap, this type of thing. And so they just get intimidated, and they say, well, you know, I maybe, you know, if I want to hear any classical music, maybe I'll just listen to a recording, or not at all. You know, this is something that I hear a lot, and I wonder whether we wouldn't necessarily change the product, because the product I think is something that's very good, but it's the way that it's presented. These are things that I think we have to think about. You know, you're talking about you were talking about the technology and different ways of reaching young people. I think these are all things that we have to consider.
I feel like you sort of open up that conversation about access and sort of cultural norms and expectations. And it gets me thinking, Christopher, about maybe coming back over to you, where you were talking about neighbors who have really different experiences being brought into conversation with each other, but they might come from lots of different family, cultural, historic norms. So how do you make spaces where folks with different expectations and needs and assets can be comfortable and contribute?
Well, you know, there's, you know, so much of the work that we do is based on that listening. You know, we listen to neighbors when it comes to issues about improving streets, or when you know, we're doing our strategic plan this year, and that's going to involve 8 different listening sessions that we're going to have throughout the neighborhood. And we are very intentional about, you know, one, sometimes these sessions are just about a particular population. So when it comes to school choice or after-school programs, we're specifically targeting families. When it comes to dealing with the business community, we specifically target folks along those commercial corridors. When it comes to the arts, though, that gives us an opening to bring everybody in. One of the first things that really gave me chills in a wonderful way about the orchestra's residency was that the main concert at Our Lady of Lourdes Church. Now, this was a church that was founded by Czechs coming in the late 19th century into Cleveland, and it's gorgeous. You go in there and it rivals anything that you would see in Europe. And over the years, it's become a Latino parish with folks of Mexican and Salvadorian heritage, still holding that Czech background. And so it was within this space that we had this free concert that brought in folks from around the neighborhood. And you would stand up and you would look around at these 700 folks, and you would see people who were very accustomed to the norms of the orchestra, and you saw folks who you could tell it was their very first time, including a gentleman who was homeless who came in the door right before the concert was to start, and the orchestra volunteers brought them in and welcomed them in, and being able to share that experience with one another, having the kind of a program that didn't require folks to wonder at the end whether to clap or not. You just felt compelled to celebrate together after every single piece, and then being able to share that and hearing people talk about this common experience afterward, not just that evening, but in the days and the weeks to come. That was a remarkable way to begin opening up not just new audiences, but new minds and new hearts to not just music, but really to one another through this phenomenal shared experience.
Thanks, Christopher, for that. Armond, I'm wondering, I wanted to ask you about, among your many constituents, of course, are artists and arts organizations. So I wonder what your experience or perception is of how Cuyahoga County listens to, responds to its artist constituents, and what that's been like to sort of learn about or observe.
We in Cuyahoga County, and I in particular, you know, I listened as I went around the community, and you know, I hear the needs of the people who live here, whether it's jobs and job creation, education, bringing our diverse constituencies together. Those are all things that are very important and that the county government can play a key role in. And so my arts and arts constituents play a key role in all of that. The arts are critical to our economic development here in Cuyahoga County, and I believe the community believes that. So it's a nice match because on the one hand, the orchestra and the arts generally, they create jobs directly. People come down to Severance Hall or go out to Blossom, they go to a restaurant or they pick up food for a picnic or they go out to a bar afterwards, and that circulates money and creates business. Or indirectly, banks like Key Bank or our major corporations are constantly looking to attract talent to Northeast Ohio. And how do you do that? You have a great orchestra as one of the things, great arts and culture, which we have here. In response, in order to make sure that happens and continues to happen, we as a community have come together to support the arts in Cuyahoga County. And I think we probably have one of the best public funding sources here in Cuyahoga County. We have an arts and culture levy, a tax which was voluntarily voted on, which these days is not so easy to do in these communities, but the people recognize that this is an important role for the community. So this year we will have a renewal of the arts and culture levy. I believe over the last 7-8 years we've raised over $125 million for the arts generally in Cuyahoga County. And I expect that the community will come together and do that again. We have an organization unrelated to the government that decides how that money is allocated so that it's not political, it's based on the needs and the benefits to the community generally.
Thank you. I'm going to use that to jump over. Beth, I want to ask you something about what you spoke about before a little in terms of an organization sort of is what it is, and it has to make sure as it's listening that it doesn't try to become something it's not. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what happens when leadership in an organization is listening and hears something that feels for some in the organization different than its mission, but for others exactly what that mission should be evolving to, and how that kind of plays out in your experience of the business world.
And I think that's a wonderful question because I think it's playing out across the world right now, because I do think the pace of change and how people want to experience things, how they want to do business, how they want to experience music. If you look at a wide array of things currently, the paradigms are shifting, and they're arguably shifting at a faster pace than they have, at least in our lifetime. And so I think one of the roles of leadership is to have a sense of those changes, have a commitment and the will to change, but some piece of it is you do have to bring your constituents with you, which includes not only your customers or the people who use your products and services, your own employees, your own communities, because you can't set out to get there if you don't, one, listen and meet the needs of who you're trying to help and serve, but bring those people, to your point, along who have done things in a certain way and believe that is meeting the need. So if you're going to change the paradigm, I think one of the things we all have to get really good about is how we talk about change, how we learn to innovate, how we learn to do things more nimbly, occasionally fail and let it be okay, and create this culture that's good and healthy and something that is necessary. And one of the lines I like to use when we talk about some of these somewhat radical changes, if you don't like change, you're really going to hate extinction. Because I think at some point, that's where we are in many venues and in many businesses, that the things, and Alisa, I particularly liked what you said, that's kind of the world we're going into. So I think there's a heightened requirement on leadership to understand that, help lead it, even though we might not know all the answers of what it's going to look like, but create it as an urgency, as a priority, and also give some license that when things are that different, you don't always know every step along the way, and create that as a safe culture as well.
So you're almost talking about allowing a process to be organic rather than know where the end point is going to be, even though you have to sort of define goals and outcomes?
Or maybe a meeting of the two. I never think you any of us is smart enough to say, I know for a fact it's this,
Yep.
but sometimes I know it's not that. And so you would redirect or give an aspirational goal that we're trying to get over here. And I think all those, in some ways, become situational, but I think you have to have the will to drive it, and then the urgency to inspect it and make sure you're getting there, and the nimbleness to be course correcting as you go. But I like this notion that if we don't innovate and we don't meet people where they are, we don't create those experiences, business or in the making of beautiful, awesome music, we're going to miss the boat, and so many people will lose.
I want to follow that with a question too, Lisa. But first, I see Christopher really with a big smile.
It's so scary.
You mean this experience here?
No, this experience is perfectly
Okay,
comfortable.
good.
But really being able to let go to some extent and to hear from the not really the folks that you serve, but the folks that you're in dialogue with, because it's not really about service. It's you're pulling in the gifts and from the folks that you perform for or the folks that you work with, and bringing them yourself. It's so scary, and we're frightened every single day because we don't know what it is that the neighborhood and our folks are coming back to say. This is what we want. This is how we want to lead. And it's very much the institutions that are willing to do that, whether it's Key Bank in changing with the times, whether it's the orchestra in having these residencies. Cuyahoga County, I was working for the county when we made this tremendous shift in governance from this three-person commissioner system to having a central county executive and everything that was taking place there. And a lot of that was pushed by the residents in the county, but then it was up to the folks within those institutions to say, all right, this is what we're hearing. How do we respond back, and how do we meet those challenges? And I think it's coming out well for all of our institutions.
Well, it makes me think about it. Alisa, tell me if I have this sense of the range of your work semi-correct. I think that you play new music a lot, or even involved in the development of new music, as well as being obviously extremely versed and virtuosic in classical and existing repertoire. So I'd be interested to know, and for us to hear, what sort of guides that desire to be all over that range of work? What is the sort of your impulse as an artist that makes you want to be doing all those different things?
Well, selfishly, I just think it's more interesting. So that's one part. But I think I use the kind of the example of Pablo Casals, who was this legendary, iconic figure, probably the most iconic cellist that has lived so far. And we cellists of today, we owe him everything for modernizing cello technique. He was born in 1876, and at the time that he was growing up, you were taught to put your bow arm like this. So you can imagine you would only use like a third of the bow if you play like this. They used to tell him to practice with a book under his arm. And so, maybe it looks like a simple change, but it was a revolutionary change, actually, to free up the bow arm and many other things that he did. And
it would almost seem common sense.
It would seem like common sense.
So it was a revolutionary change that seemed common sense.
In that sense, yes. But he hated the music of his time. So, you would think, well, if he was more open to the music of his time, maybe we would have a Ravel cello concerto or a Debussy cello concerto, something like this. Rostropovich, on the other hand, who of course was a couple generations later, was a huge devotee of the music of his time, premiered over, 1,000 works in his lifetime. And so, and was almost single-handedly responsible for the cello repertoire of the 20th century. And so, I know many other musicians of today take him as a huge source of inspiration to develop the repertoire of your own time, of one's own time. And so that's one thing that I think about all the time. And it'll be very interesting to see what sort of filters out over the next 50 years, what will be called an early 21st century classic. You think of 20th century classics. The other thing, though, in terms of trying to reach as many people as possible, I always like the idea of pairing the very new with the very familiar. So if you're with programming, for example, my first concerto recording, I put Elgar Concerto, which everybody knows, and with a Carter cello concerto, which fewer people know. Some people do know it, but it's a completely different worlds, completely and utterly different. Could not be more different.
And more people know it now because you made that choice, I would assume.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That was the aim, but I think I've always personally shied away from programming all new music because I feel like if you've already pigeonholed it, if you do that, if you don't pair it with more, let's say, more better known or mainstream music, and that's the way you kind of integrate it into the core repertoire, I think.
Thank you. You really sort of make me think about this. This whole conversation makes me think, as we often say, in the 21st century, and wondering if we think about our institutions and how they'll be looked back on at this moment, and how we evolved or didn't evolve. That's an interesting way for me to think about the story of where we're at right now. I'm going to stop with the artist on the stage sort of having the last word. And I want to say thank you to all four of you very much. We're at our hard 3 p.m. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for having us.
Oh, that's